And just as I promised, I'm going to continue with my chutney. Yes, we made some chutney in life, and now we need to pack this into the jar, which is a very important bit as well for the fermentation. And you can use something like a Fido jar like this, or you can recycle. I usually upcycle my jars quite a lot, so you can use something like this with metal lid. Make sure that the ingredients, your chutney or whatever you're making, doesn't touch the lid, because otherwise it's gonna rust. And fermentation is acidic, so it can leach some unwanted things into your food, so you don't want that. Right, so I'm going to use, it's quite simple, yeah. I am going to need the magical tool that I've got here. I call it vegetable stomper. I'm sure you can purchase that on Amazon, or you can just use, depending on where you live, obviously. If it's Eastern Europe, those things are made there for the purpose of sauerkraut and other ferments making. So that's a purpose-made tool, and it's quite easy to find it there, source it there. In UK, you can buy it in Amazon, or you can use a rolling pin, you know, the wooden rolling pin without handles. It's just kind of like a brick. So it's like a thick stick. You can use that for packing your ferment into the jar. So this is quite an important bit. I'm going to just fill up the jar. Don't know if this jar is too big. I will see that in the process. While we go, I have prepared a smaller jar just in case. Some bits and pieces will be falling. And when you make, this is a clean surface, cleaned everything. By the way, the jar, I did wash my jar and I did sterilize it with boiling water, sorry. And sterilization, the need for sterilization or no need for sterilization, there's different cases for that, and I might share that a bit later with you. Probably like write a post on that or do another live. Right, so filling this up. This might be a little bit too big a jar. Maybe a little bit more. Basically, with the jar, with filling up the jar with your ferment, it's quite important not to overpack or underpack. So basically, when your jar is I tend to leave about 3 to 5 centimeters from the top. I never pack the jar to the brim, because the fermentation activity will push out ingredients or juice, the brine. So you want to keep everything in your jar. But if there's too much space, there's a problem with that as well. There's too much oxygen, because remember the fermentation process, this particular one, lactic fermentation, doesn't require, it's anaerobic, so without oxygen. So you want to eliminate oxygen as much as possible. And obviously, if there's too much free space in the jar, if you have, for example, if you fill up the jar like half or less than a half, that might not, but it might, it's very possible to attract some unwanted microorganisms like mold, can become yeast, can be something else. So you don't really want that to happen. And basically here I've got a bit less liquid than I wanted. Yeah. So if you see this, I'll show you like that. There is some liquid, but obviously not enough. And mind you, you don't need to cover, the brine does not need to cover everything, like 1 or 2 centimeters on top of your veg or fruit. It's not necessary. But you do need to, by the way, this is for those who just joining, who haven't seen live broadcast. This is apple chutney, Indian style, that I'm going to, that I'm packing into the jar for further fermentation. So it's going to be a fermented, a probiotic ferment, and it's raw. It's not cooked. Yes, it's a raw chutney. Right, I'm going to create. Here's my magical water bottle. Going to create 2% brine to use and to put on top of this, to pour on top of this. And let me just, all right, so I got my everything. So I'm going to create 100, probably 50 milliliter. Yeah, I'll do 100 because I'm doing another ferment, so I might end up using this. 100 milliliter and 2 grams of salt. Basically 2 grams of salt. A little bit more is not a problem. And I'm going to put this aside. Right. A little heat. Going to dissolve, quickly dissolve the salt and pour on top of this. I could have used water kefir for this, just to fill up, like use probably 30-50 grams on top. Or I could have used that same liquid from brining, the brine from fermented other vegetables on top of it, but I want to show you how to do this. Okay, so just pouring on top, and this is a salted, and by the way, I did taste the chutney before I switched on this video, before I put this into the jar. Yeah, so we made the jar. I made the chutney, chopped everything, all the fresh ingredients, added herbs if I'm using, and I added correct amount of salt, and I added some spices, water, and I added the starter liquid as well from the previously fermented vegetables, and I left it in the. I mixed everything together in a bowl, and I left it to sit for an hour. Actually, it was I think it was 2.5 hours before I pack it into the jar. So I taste it again, adjust the flavors, adjust the taste. If I'm happy with saltiness, with sweetness, and with heat, yeah, because I did put some chili peppers, so I start packing it into the jar. So do make sure you taste your ferments along the way, and start with day 0 before you pack that. Yeah, so for me personally, I'm going to be checking on my ferment daily, and there's a window over there. Maybe you see there is. For me, that's enough brine, and everything is basically, hope you can see that, everything is basically floating in brine. Yeah, the brine doesn't have to cover it like a couple of centimeters on top. And there are quite a few techniques on how to, wait a little bit more, on how to keep everything under brine. There's some contraptions you can use, but I just use, I don't use any of that. I'm going to close this tightly. Well, first of all, before closing, with my clean finger, clean finger, I'm going to make sure that there's no bits and pieces on the walls, because that is going to attract some unwanted microorganisms. Yeah, so exposed to oxygen, that is going to that might attract mold and whatnot. You don't want that to happen. So I'm going to leave this at room temperature for around 7 up to 14 days, depending on the temperatures. Around 20 in the kitchen at the moment. So I'm going to be watching this ferment daily. It is going to join those guys over there, yeah, and anytime, you know, I spend in the kitchen quite a lot of time, so it's just going to be there, and I'm going to, usually in the morning, every morning I check my water bottle, check all my ferments that need checking. And actually I didn't show you the use of this. Actually, in the ferment like this, even packing with your tablespoon works well, yeah, but especially for sauerkraut you might want to use this. And packing serves a few, see, like this, packing serves a few goals. First of all, you're trying to pack in one jar as much as possible, and second of all, you want to push out, create more brine, and push out any air bubbles, any oxygen bubbles that might form at the bottom. Yeah, so that's your goals. I'm going to leave it here at room temperature. I'm going to watch that ferment daily, and by looking at it and by tasting, I'm going to determine when my ferment is going to be ready. I hope that was helpful, guys. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, do person message me. Bye. Direct message me.